Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. Every week, we give you 3 short stories, 1 big stories, and our wins and losses. I'm with my great co-hosts and Zeta. After a few hours hanging out with real people who listen to our podcast for our first ever 817 gather. That was awesome.
It was awesome. I'm a little tired and a little worn out, but it was amazing. I mean, even I, who love to be around people, that was a lot of peopling, but it was fantastic. I got to meet people in person that I've been corresponding with online that I'd never met before. I would say I knew quite a few of the people and had met many of them in person. But it was great and inspiring and uplifting and all of that. And then we started looking at stories we were going to talk about today and just brought me right back down.
Yeah, and the gather was a hit because I think, I mean, shout out to Nydia who emceed it for us and kind of moderated it. That was really cool. I think a lot of people were expecting more just to like you and I having a conversation in front of them and then like us just talking about the election, the news, but really it was more of a let's set the standard of like getting to know each other. And I'm not sure if people were ready for that or not, you know, but I think we're going to do it again. We're looking at the third week of every month. And next one though, I think I love the idea that we couldn't get the podcast room open, but we should have the podcast room open for the next 817 gather. So then people can come in and give their hot takes on the show and we'll just have it recorded. And so I think a lot of them who were here would have loved to do something like that.
I think so too. And I think we started off being pretty transparent and telling people that we did have kind of a format that Nydia had put together that was fantastic in my opinion. I felt like that went really, really well. But like you said, we didn't really tell everybody exactly how things were going to go down and what it was. I think my biggest takeaway of what it was and what I hope it will continue to be, but we're going to get feedback from those who participated as to what they would like to see to continue wanting to participate, was building community, basically. And that really speaks to me. I mean, several people mentioned coming to Fort Worth and not finding people that they could kind of vibe with and feel close to and want to spend time around. And it took them long periods of time to kind of find that community. And I feel like this is like supercharge finding community. Yeah. And so we just have to kind of figure out, because people have other commitments and other places that they plug in and do things. And what is it that they would like to see come out of this group? Yeah. And what do we want to see come out of this group? So it's all very positive to me. I think whatever it ends up being will be something that will be beneficial to you and I individually and everybody that participates individually and to the overall community of Fort Worth.
Yeah.
And what we want to see our future be.
I agree. And I think that goes into a great kind of some of the topics that, you know, as we continue to have the 817 gathers, maybe we can have more in-person discussions around some of the things we're talking about, because we're seeing a consistent theme. The stories that we're kind of hitting today are around the design of our city. And I know the first story here, which you can bring in, is about Fort Worth motorists increasingly stuck in traffic as commute times increase. Obviously, this is a classic sad and story here.
I know, like you just wanted to bring me right back down, crashing to the earth, and take away all of the joy that was created this morning with gathering with these fantastic people. Because I had not seen this article yet, and you sent it to me this morning, and I'm doing all of this work advocating for public transportation, and every month or every week I say again how we're not going to be able to all get around in our single occupancy vehicles, and every week you tell me you're not going to allow me to say that anymore, and then you show me more articles that make me have to say that more and more. Because this article basically dives into the fact that other people are apparently doing what I've been doing for years, and that is avoiding driving on highways. And they are setting their GPSs and taking surface streets. And that's all well and good, except for those streets are not going to be able to handle the capacity if everybody stops driving on the highways and takes the local streets. And there's the issue of people driving on the local streets as if they are highways, which is incredibly dangerous and terrible, and no one should do that. I think that being stuck in stop and go slower traffic on a freeway where you feel like you should be going fast maybe is more frustrating to people than going slowly on neighborhood streets, because the description by some of these people is, it's less stressful to be on these local streets.
Yeah, it said Fort Worth, which has more than 499,385 workers 16 years old and up, ranked at number 10 in Forbes' hardest commutes in the U.S. with an average time of 26.8 minutes. The city came right behind Dallas, which has an average commute time of 29.7 minutes. The 2024 study, based on 8 data points, including U.S. Census information, showed Fort Worth has a walkability score of 35 and access to transit score of 22 out of 100. The percentage of households without access to vehicle was 2%. And you have to understand that we're looking at Fort Worth spends 46 hours annually on the road due to congestion, which is nearly 2 days. And we're only getting bigger. We have 8 million people across North Texas today. They're talking about that doubling by 2050. Residence areas with the longest commute, 33.6 minutes for those who live in 76052, near the Alliance area of northern Tarrant County. Next is 76131 by Blue Mound and Interstate 820 interchange. They have a 30.7 minute commute. Fort Worth residents with the shortest commute, 5.9 minutes, live in the sparsely populated 76127 zip code between West Worth Village and East Lake Worth. Obviously, we're seeing people vote wanting to have more transit, and that transit is a priority for them. But at the same time, most of our costs goes to building more roads. We have a TxDOT has a road project to ease congestion, including the $175 million I-820 East Loop project, which began construction July 2018. And you have others. An estimated cost of $1.6 billion for the Southeast Connector project is currently underway to rebuild and widen about 11 miles of 820.
It literally says under the heading of transit needs, and then everything that's listed is money that's going towards building more lanes. So the Interstate 30 Clear Lanes project, which is broken ground. TxDOT has other road projects, and they say to ease congestion, including the $175 million Loop 820 East Loop project, and the $1.6 billion for the Southeast Connector project. Literally this whole thing is talking about lanes and widening lanes and building highways. And then you get down to where Michael Morris, who's the director of transportation for the North Central Texas Council of Governments, starts talking about how we have to look at land use and allowing density to occur and things to occur where you live closer to where you work so that everybody's not having to get on a highway. But basically, the region's plans are for roads. And if you go and look at what the state allows us to do with TxDOT money, there is a rail division, but there are specific restrictions on spending some of that money on anything but roads. So I don't know what pushes you over the edge of we're not doing rational things anymore. We are just continuing. And I don't know if it's because there's a lot of people making money off of building more roads. And so there's no incentive to change that dynamic, or only 2.10% of the population doesn't have access to a car. And therefore, we're not talking to people who are currently needing that transit. And so everybody just sees public transportation as something that is not something that they need. There's some saying that says, we want 97% of everyone else to ride public transportation so that we can continue to drive in our cars. And I think that's literally what it is. I see people constantly who already live in the urban core of the city fight changes to the roadway and changes to density that would allow for more compact development and more transit to serve those areas from people who already live in those areas and want to continue to live in those areas in a way that is not transit friendly and not complete streets friendly, and that will allow them to continue to just drive their cars.
And there are also some other 2 articles that I saw that will be in the pod notes, just because it seems like there's also now crime being involved with just like large crime happening across North Texas when it comes to vehicles. And organized crime wing have been accused of stealing over $283,000 worth of diesel fuel from North Texas gas stations. According to a warrant for one of the suspects, a series of at least 42 thefts took place in several counties in the DFW area over the span of November 21 to January 2023. So this is talking about 46,000 gallons of fuel that was taken. And then also, I don't know if you saw this, that there was a nationwide criminal ring stole nearly $5 million worth of cars from DFW Airport.
Yeah, you sent that to me and said, there's a reason to take the train.
Well, that's what I was funny. What if these are all like Robin Hood, people trying, to make the good of the world and saying, we're coming for these vehicles.
I don't understand it. Well, I mean, I don't know about the cost of diesel fuel because I haven't put diesel into anything and I don't know how long, but the price of gas is not high. So I don't understand what the impetus is for people to be stealing gas, but.
So it's just a part of our daily life and even just, the crime around it. So it's just, not only is it dangerous to drive, now there's other businesses around, the value of cars and us driving our cars to the airports. Even in this story, talks about how 77% of people drive, 76% of Tarrant County drove alone to work. Like that seems like, a difficult number to manage on roads as we continue to grow. But this leads us to the second story, which was a New York Times article, which is why are property taxes rising the most. They're up nearly every major U.S. metro, but Fort Worth was on the list. We fell at number 8 on the property tax heights. This was a study that happened in 2019, and it showed the increase by 2024. And Fort Worth is the 8th highest property tax increase across the country, with 44% increase since 2019, with a median monthly property tax bill being $508 a month. So this goes with the cost of infrastructure, and people, like when they look at the analysis of why the rise of property taxes, a part of it is also the infrastructure needing to build out to these sprawling neighborhoods is creating a rise. And plus, since we don't, most of these states that are on this list are states with no state income tax. So the property tax is the driving revenue. But it's just like people say they come to Texas because it's affordable. And if you now have to have a vehicle, you have to have a vehicle to live in Texas.
People don't necessarily count all the things that lend to that unaffordability. Like they think, oh, this house is cheaper, but they don't think about the time and the commute and all of that lost when you buy a house further sprawled out. People don't think about the cost of a car, the upkeep of a car, the insurance of a car, the maintenance of the car, all that. They don't think of that as a cost because it's not the one right in front of their nose. It's not the rent. But if you add the car payment to the insurance, to the maintenance, that all needs to be considered.
And we talked in the last episodes about how so many people are using 30 to 50% of their income just on their rent. Now you talk about the car. This to me is like the Texas way that people don't realize it's really not that affordable to live in Texas as much as we think, when other people in other areas can go without the vehicle and having different ways of paying taxes rather than just a big property tax bill that we constantly exist with.
And most of these cities are not raising their tax rate. So this is falling to the values going up, which is what's making the tax bill go up. And the values are going up because more and more demand is happening. And so then there's a limited demand. And so people pay more to get what they didn't used to pay as much for. And I mean, I don't know what the solution to that is. I think that we continue to, and I mean, I mentioned before that in articles about public transportation, some of the first comments in social media is that it should all be free. Mm-hmm. And again, nothing is free. Nothing is free. You either pay for it yourself or you pay taxes to pay for it. And I think that we all pay taxes that go towards things that we might not necessarily choose as individuals to support. Yeah. But if it's something that helps the greater good,
Yeah.
then it's something that we should be willing to at least talk about supporting for more people than our own personal selves.
What's interesting about this New York Times article and the ranking here, Indianapolis was number 1 with the highest increase, Atlanta number 2, Jacksonville number 3, Tampa number 4, Miami number 5. Like I said,
a lot of stuff going on in Florida.
but yeah, I mean, the crazy thing when it looks at the actual price point, Indianapolis median monthly is $205 a month. Atlanta is $239. Fort Worth is the second highest of the top 10. We're only behind Dallas with $508 monthly as the median monthly property tax bill. That's high. I mean it's higher. Miami $367, Tampa $250, Jacksonville, Florida $228. Jacksonville is similar size to Fort Worth, and they have half the property tax. So we're paying a lot in property taxes because that's our only way to fund our city. And then now that we're trying to defund that, it's going to be really difficult to continue to have growth in the city. Yeah. So moving into short story number 3, this is an update on the Mercy Culture, one of its justice residency shelter for human trafficking survivors. We've been talking about this a lot, but they recently had their zoning meeting, and there was a full house of obviously Mercy Culture's group, but then also people from the neighborhood who were showing concerns.
So the zoning commission runs differently than the city council does, in that there is a time limit for the time that people in favor of something can speak, and then a time limit for those opposed to speak, and then there's a rebuttal period for the people who are proposing the change. And so the chair of the zoning commission increased that time, knowing that there was multiple people that wanted to speak. And so instead of 7 minutes for each and then a 2-minute rebuttal, he increased it to 15 minutes each, and then the rebuttal at the end. But even though there was a full room, it's not like council where everybody gets 3 minutes and the meeting goes on for hours and hours and hours. This is a zoning commission meeting where the zoning commissioners just limit the time. So there was 15 minutes on each side. There was 3 or 4 speakers, I think, on each side. I think that the folks in favor of the site plan change from the church spoke in the rebuttal that hadn't spoken in the original presentation. And then the commission voted, and they voted to recommend to the city council to deny the request with a 6-3 or 6-4.
Yep,
6-4 vote. None of them spoke to say why or what they were basing that on. If you read the staff report actually recommends approval. I think the concern being that maybe the definition of a church-related activity, and they feel like this is just a site plan change versus a full-fledged zoning change. So it'll be interesting to see what the council does with this. I think that this whole idea that any activity that a church deems as being their activity can be done on a piece of property that is for a church specifically is opening up a whole can of worms that isn't necessarily compatible and consistent with surrounding land use. And I think that's what these things should be based on. I think that some of the folks in opposition were bringing up concerns about congestion and traffic and safety. I think that if people are going to run services like this, they should be people who are professionals in that area. And those, I don't know who regulates that, but it's not a land use question. Yeah. So I think it's still kind of up in the air. I don't necessarily know that keeping track of the number of cars that are parked on a street versus having parking spaces for those. I mean, that kind of goes back to the whole transportation question, that if people had other ways to get around, we wouldn't have to have so much storage for cars everywhere.
Yeah, and the church has threatened legal action against the city if the site plan amendment isn't approved. However, Allison Ashmore, an attorney representing the Oak Horse neighborhood, said legal action from the neighborhood is also possible if the city approves the change. The city council will take up the case at 6 p.m. December 10th, so it's going to be a big story before the holidays. We feel that, I mean, at least I can talk for myself, that the pressure is there where the city is going to approve it. Like I mean, if I'm looking at the vote situation.
I mean, I don't know what was said in the preparation for the zoning commission meeting, because typically they go over the whole agenda in a work session before. And I don't think that's recorded. So I don't know what was said there. I don't know nobody asked for legal to stand up and give an interpretation. The staff report is public. You can go and read the staff report and see what it says. But I think, as the applicants pointed out, some of the staff made public comments in a neighborhood meeting about how this fits with a church activity. So I think from a land use perspective, it is a major change to a site plan. It is adding much more to a site plan than was ever anticipated. And so I think you could look at it from that perspective and be like, this isn't really compatible in next to a park, next to a neighborhood. It's much more intense. But I don't know. I mean, none of the zoning commissioners gave reasons for their votes. They just voted. There was a motion made, there was a second, and then the votes came out. And not normally, but I think as a city planner, attorneys have told us as zoning commissioners, when I served on the zoning commission for 6 years, and as a council member, that especially if you're going to make a recommendation that is not in alignment with what the staff report says, that you should put on the record what it is you're hanging your hat on, why you made that motion the way you did.
The other challenge that's going to be here is that this is going to be political jujitsu of how does Mercy Culture uses its pressure. This is a place where Tim O'Hare gets their blessing. This is a place, right, that we talk about, got a mayor fourth on the list. And so they've challenged and said they will challenge the people who decline this. So, this is in District 11. So that's a lot of pressure on Councilwoman Martinez, who is relatively a moderate institutional Democrat. How much is she going to have fear or be fierce in her decision? And then it just goes with, right, then it just starts falling from there. Like, how does Nathan Scott's line relationship and the Republican seats of the city council?
Just to be clear, there are no city council is nonpartisan, so
yes,
there are no
correct.
Republican and Democrat seats on the council.
yes, but you can know where they fall, even though there's a couple where it's interesting.
I mean, it's discouraging to me that one might feel that they could not make a decision based on whatever sound planning principles that they would list off as to their reasoning for why they would make a decision, and not fear that an organization would rally a massive opposition to them. Speaking as someone who was in a council seat and often made decisions that sounded like maybe they went against the loud voices in the room, because a large group of people would show up and be opposed to affordable housing, for example, and I would go ahead and make a recommendation to approve that affordable housing, or a hotel, for example. And I think that it's important to remember
Mercy Culture is going to have its own La Quinta. There it is, going to be a little hotel, maybe one day. Why couldn't they? If they wanted to do a church activity, could they create a hotel?
I guess if they can tie it back to their mission.
That's
This is what I was saying, that I thought that even though I think that it's a sticky wick to get into what people define as a church activity and whether or not that activity can be carried out on property. I mean, for example, the religious organization that I grew up affiliated with is Quakers, and Quakers meet in meeting houses, and meeting houses are often single-family homes in the middle of neighborhoods with absolutely no parking. Yeah. And because churches can be in any zoning category and they cannot be excluded, they don't have the requirements of all of that. And so if you want to put one in the middle of a neighborhood and that neighborhood gets filled up with people coming to that service every Sunday, that's just an impact that's going to happen because we allow churches to be in every zoning category. Yeah. And I think that people are fine with that when it's their church and it's not impacting their neighborhood, or maybe they wouldn't be fine with it if it was impacting themselves. I mean, there are religious organizations that stay within a community and everybody walks to those services. I mean, there's some Jewish organizations that, they don't drive on those days, and so they live and work and play all around where they worship as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating that churches could literally be anywhere, but mixed use housing can't. That's just,
or affordable housing.
Yeah,
can't.
affordable housing. That's just it's mind blowing to say the least. But obviously, December 10th is going to be a big for everyone who's about this story. One character who came to the gathering actually talked about mercy culture and how Fort Worth is just a hub. When the data looks like where to create a church, Fort Worth is the spot. Mercy culture pitches itself as the fastest growing church in the country. They have a second location in District 5, which is also an eyesore off the highway. And I just think this leads to the big story. And the big story is how does Tarrant County look under conservative language that is usually managed through the church, but then also the media. And on top of that now, like with Tarrant County clearly voting for Donald Trump over Kamala Harris, what is the real reason Texas isn't turning blue is an article we're going to cover. And what's the lost script there for Democrats, and just how everyone is coming to Tarrant County, from YouTubers to conspiracy-led organizations to Elon Musk wanting to do his work here. So there's a lot that we need to figure out. So this title here is Tarrant County the lead on America's conservative media? And you might rightfully be able to say so. And so I'm actually going to talk about Elon Musk, who is going to steer his X disputes in Tarrant County. This is a Guardian post that came out October 17th, but it says Elon Musk has updated its terms of service to steer any disputes from users on the social media platform known as Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, to a federal court in Texas, whose judges frequently deliver victories to conservative litigants in political cases. New terms of services that will take effect on November 15th, which this was a big thing that allows X to basically use AI and learning tools on everyone's data, exclusively filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas, Tarrant County. It is common for companies to include venue clauses in their terms of services specifying why forum would hear in disputes filed against them, but the choice of the Northern District of Texas stands out because X is not located in Tarrant County. Following a move from San Francisco, it moved to Bastrop, Texas, near Austin, whose federal court is in Texas Western District. The district has far fewer Republican-appointed judges than the Northern District of Tarrant County. So X did not respond to a request when being talked about this. You had Don Lennon, who also said he is leaving X, but also brought up Tarrant County being the spot where X is going to file its cases because we are pro-conservative version of freedom of speech so that X can get away with doing what it's doing. Someone who's married to a lawyer and also a user of social media. What is your take on what this is?
Two things. One, most people just click the button and agree to all the terms and don't read diddly squat, and they have no idea what that they've just agreed to. And two, I think it is really a sad condition when judges are political. In other states, you don't run as a Republican or a Democrat as a judge. And in this case, there's appointments that are made by people who are in partisan seats, and there are races and elections that require people to signal a partisan affiliation. And so the fact that there are courts where people are shopping to try to get a different outcome, I think just flies in the face of what courts are meant to do. Yeah. And that is adjudicate fairly for everybody involved.
So true.
And so I find it all very disheartening. But as someone who's married to a lawyer who practiced for 35 years and basically was sharing with some folks the other day, not from Texas, this has been their experience in the legal system, having an uphill battle of always having to consider if a court is going to be friendly to their client's position because of politics.
Yeah.
And having politicians constantly trying to impact negatively their ability to practice law in the way that they would like to be able to practice law.
And what's interesting is that with this also has created a rise in a new platform. I don't know if you've created your Blue Sky account yet, but people are users are flocking to a new social media platform because of this challenge. But to me, I just think I even see myself sadly being more on X these days post-election, and even during the election. I'm trying to get away from it because now, not a lot of Tarrant County leaders made Trump's cabinet, which I found surprising. But it seems like if Truth Social X are going to use Tarrant County as its space to get away with what its version of freedom of speech is, you're going to eventually create a lot more gatherings here for that kind of people to feel welcomed and okay to operate. We've already seen Nazi groups at restaurants. We've seen the botanical gardens used for white nationalist panels. You have Mercy Culture here. Nick Fuentes was here. Kyle Rittenhouse was recently here again. Like, it feels like Kyle Rittenhouse is a regular member of Tarrant counties these days. We talked about how this started with the Tea Party. We talked about QAnon. So it's like, now if we're creating a court that allows these people to get away with their languages on these platforms, what does that do with the overall health and safety of being here, almost, in a way? So I think another story to bring up around this is, which I actually see this as a positive for PBR, the professional bull riding terminates its contract with Dr. Phil's Fort Worth media company after missed payments. Fort Worth-based Merritt Street Media allegedly failed to pay right fees owed to professional bull riding organization. PBR is also based in Fort Worth, inked a 4-year media right partnership agreement with Dr. Phil's Merritt Street Media in May. The partnership began in July. Nearly 6 months later, PBR has parted ways with Merritt Street for allegedly not paying rights fee owed. To me, what's disappointing about this, it wasn't that PBR disconnected with them because of Dr. Phil's own behavior and the conspiracy and the conservative media of choosing. PBR did it out of business. Oh, they weren't paying their bills. But it's like, so much of the media is housed right here in Fort Worth, from Dr. Phil to now X. And we even had a boxing match, right? The most popular thing to happen in AT&T Stadium from a combat sports perspective happened this weekend between Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. And this was such a big thing. It surpassed $17.8 million in ticket sales. This was larger than the Canelo Alvarez fight, which was $9 million, which was also hosted in AT&T Stadium. And so it's like, why I think that was a concern. To me, it's like, why I see that as a concern. It's not that was bad for society. I just think, like, what kind of society are we becoming where the number one thing we all want to watch in America is a white 27, 28-year-old YouTube influencer fight a 58, 60-year-old black boxer. And clearly they shouldn't have been in the ring together. And all of us being like, that's what we want to watch. Like,
hey, not all of us.
I know.
So you know.
Okay.
We had this discussion before we started recording. I had no desire to watch that at all. And
yeah.
I don't like to watch. I mean, I probably have a personal bias, being raised a Quaker.
With violence.
Of the violence. Anybody
that's
hitting
what I'm saying.
Anybody.
It's like, it's such, to me, a barbaric state that we live in America, that this is what we all wanted to watch on TV. As a statistic, this is the highest viewed watching live combat event in history. And it's just like,
Do you think it was the novelty of it, though? It's not necessarily that people wanted to see. I mean, obviously, these two people agreed to do this. Both of them agreed. Nobody was there against their will. Was it just a spectacle that they were putting out there and everybody's making some money from it? What's the deal?
well, and I think that's the part of, right, like Mike Tyson was once made $400 million and went all the way down to bankrupt, and he made $20 million off doing this.
Right.
But it's also just like, I think that's like the challenging part about capitalism is you end up doing things that you probably shouldn't do, but you feel like you need to do because you need to live.
I mean,
And
there are
even
things.
the richest people had to do that.
There are things that have been available where to pay to watch that I have done that I was then later like, oh, I have to admit that I did that. This happened before you were born, probably. I don't even remember what year it was, but Howard Stern had a New Year's Eve special that was pay-per-view, and we paid to view it, and my mother and my uncle were at our house at the time, and it was mortifying because the stuff that happens on the Howard Stern show is pretty explicit.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just hearing, it was seeing. And so, I'm not all pure in that I haven't indulged in watching something that is a little bit embarrassing. To me, wanting to watch that kind of a fight is a little bit embarrassing. And I will say that I did pay for that pay-per-view, and that was a little embarrassing.
Yeah.
But it was a spectacle. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, I didn't feel like that defined me as a person. I gave in to the spectacle of all the hype of what that was going to be. And I kind of feel like
think that happened
that's
here.
what that was.
I definitely think that happened here. And again, I'm not here to say we shouldn't have fun and all that stuff, but it's like, in a way, the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson strategy is the Donald Trump strategy of how he became president. Like, it ends up, the same people who watch Jake Paul or who likes this kind of stuff is the reason why the young male vote went to Trump. It's the same strategy of just like getting people heightened over a topic that isn't very joyful or collaborative or like healthy. And I think that's just like the interesting part of like, what is Dallas Fort Worth becoming? Are we in a way like, I don't know, it's like we're conservative, but like in a way we're almost becoming like are we becoming Las Vegas where we're going to have spectacles now, and it's all about the spectacle and all the cars.
There's a huge conversation about gambling and all of that too.
Yeah, and like now does the casinos come and so it's just tough because like what's funny, it's like you got places like Texas and Oklahoma who say they're really conservative, but like Oklahoma has casinos, cannabis, and churches. So it's like, how does it all fit together?
Is it a matter of nobody wants to pay for everything, and so we got to figure out other ways to pay for it?
Yeah.
So
the
we're
syntax.
open to exactly because it's easier to make that go up higher and higher. I mean, the tax on a pack of cigarettes or a carton of cigarettes has made that super expensive. But who's going to stand up and fight for trying to keep cigarettes accessible? Yeah. And I think that, like you said, the sin tax. I think that people don't want to pay more taxes. They don't want to pay fees. All the things, but they want it all to be provided. I don't know what the answer is, EJ. This is getting really depressing.
Well, this kind of goes to like, I know you're like already like sad that this is the topic we're talking about right now, but like, I think this is also like the whole conversation we really wanted to talk about is like, will Texas ever really be able to figure out its progressive story? A new Republic.com article called "The Real Reason Texas Isn't Turning Blue," plus a Texas Tribune article coming out about how Texas Democratic Party chair steps down after dismal election performance. So in a way, like all of this conservative media power, or what did you call it? Spectacle media that keeps us distracted from the real challenges, right? No one knows about the road challenges. No one knows about, the
and
property
then instead
taxes.
of getting together and trying to talk through a solution that we can all kind of come to together, we we just retreat to our separate corners and dig in our heels and refuse to even consider a solution that might be considered a progressive solution or might be considered a conservative solution. And so everybody's just kind of like retreating to their camps and refusing to discuss it.
So the last kind of article in this big media, what would you have to say about the real reason Texas isn't turning blue? After reading that article?
I mean, the thing that stuck out to me was talking about, like, if you're going to run as a Democrat in Texas, that you had to be like a certain kind of Democrat. You had to show that you were like strong and you had some kind of military background. And then they talk about ways to advertise and highlight what it is that you're trying to do. Like with Colin Allred, they honed in on his NFL linebacker history and that he was, strong. And I think that all of that flies in the face of the way I see how people should want to serve in a political office. To simplify it, I would see someone who would be mad about one thing and then they would go, I'm going to run for city council just to fight that one thing. I see people who are like, I want to make things as conservative as possible and I want to forward these conservative viewpoints. And so I'm going to run for office and just carry forward this mantle of trying to accomplish this thing. Whereas I see serving in public office as wanting to serve people. And so you have to have a willingness, or you should have a willingness to listen to people. And that's not to say that you have to do everything that the people tell you to do, because clearly we're split down the middle almost in some of these things if we're looking at it from a political point of view. And it's not always needing to be looked at from a political partisan viewpoint. But you have to be willing to serve and hear from and have conversations. And all of the things in this article, to me, are like, how do you convince just enough people to get you into office so that you can then move forward with your agenda or the agenda of the people that you have surrounded yourselves with?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I find just disheartening.
Well, I think like wrapping it around like the other stories we just talked about, it's like everything in Fort Worth is you have to somehow signal that you're a military person before you bring up a progressive idea, or you have to somehow talk about how you're a cowboy or you respect rodeo, like you rodeo as well. Like there's always this,
or you go to church.
Yeah, it's like you have to like signal, hey, we were late here, but then I'm going to open up to talk about something maybe different that doesn't make you uncomfortable. And it's just like, I think that's why when they talk about the MJ Hagars or the Colin Allreds, it's like they're constantly moderating themselves because, even Gil Hinojosa said that, which was, and I think a lot of the conversation here, and I'm not sure if it's right, but he basically is arguing that because we kept bringing up trans rights, that's the reason why we lost Texas and Democrats and people.
And I think to my point is, if you're constantly trying to move, like if you're constantly, the progressive tent is big. Like there's not total alignment and agreement in there. And so when people say, in order to win, you need to do what the people on the right have done, and that is just go full bore in that ideology, you're not going to be able to bring forward that broad tent because we don't all agree on all of the things.
Yeah.
And so I don't see that as being the solution.
What's going to be interesting from a state level, but then a national level, is how do the Democrats respond enough for the next, you got to respond in 2 years for that vote. But then also just like this whole middle trying to make us look more moderate isn't working because more Republicans aren't coming over to not vote against Trump. I mean, it was like a 1% lift for Kamala on Republicans compared to Joe Biden. And was it really worth it compared to, should you actually signal or pit people who are actually more progressive in the room that gets more people excited to go vote for fresher ideas? I just think that's the overall battle here. My whole fear, and this could be me being a not maybe progressive enough, but I am currently a believer that the social issues is the distraction right now. I think I actually believe that most people currently voted are working class people who don't realize that they're voting on a white led male stack. They just think it's normal. I mean, I do believe in racism. I do believe in white supremacy, but I don't have time to make other people. I can never bring that up if in a campaign, because that's not where people are today from a intelligence or conscious level to have that discussion.
Well, and the way we do bring it up is usually critical and
Yeah.
makes people feel bad, and then
Yeah.
that's not. Then this conversation stops.
So
too.
then it's like you can't bring up that. You can't bring up racism, white supremacy. Then the next thing you can't bring up is social issues. And again, I think that if I had to make a bet, if the Democratic Party was going to listen to my opinion right now, my opinion would be around how do you change the language around economics. So, right, Trump won on inflation. Your groceries are higher today. You remember when I was in office, they weren't high. I think you can easily position Elon Musk as, do you want AI to take all your jobs? Something like that can scare a bunch of average, regular people to say, wow, I don't want to vote for Trump who has Elon Musk who's wanting to take all of our jobs. Like, to me, that's what's going to be the thing that excites people to vote against Trump, is their self-interest, unfortunately. And for them, it's their job. Can I pay my bills? Can I pay my property taxes that we just talked about? Can I pay for my single occupancy vehicle that I'm doing? Oh, why would I vote for the Trump party? Because Elon Musk is trying to take all of our jobs. How many people use that as a campaign strategy? I think that would work over leaning in on progressive stuff. That's just my current opinion, is that, like, I don't think the world's clearly ready for us to talk about those other two, social issues and racial issues. But if we made it about the economy and how they're trying to take jobs, what's the blend? I think that's a real fear. Where does capitalism and government stop now? Are they not the same thing today? Elon Musk is the president today, in my opinion. So it's like there's no stop. So it's like, I feel like if you had the average people see that today, I think that could get us to change the language. But I don't think most progressive campaign grassroots organizers would agree with me on that. And they would say we need to talk more about working people getting under the same beliefs of, like, healthcare, which that's another one. Why can't we talk about health? It seems like we all agree on healthcare. Funding education.
See, I would like to find the things that we can agree on and be for, and stop with all the things that are just like trying to scare people to vote against something. I think that's this last election was very much, if you vote for that, it's going to be this terrible, awful thing. Both sides were doing that. And I think that it was that I find a harder sell. And then this article also goes into how do we communicate, like social media and harnessing that, and being willing to go on certain shows but not being willing to go on other shows, or coming up with our own show that can rival the popularity of that show. But I don't think that's the answer either. I think it's all a willingness to have these conversations anywhere and everywhere with anyone.
Yep.
Instead of this retreating and isolating and pulling back and not talking to folks that might have a different opinion.
Well, I know we gave you a lot in that big story to digest, because we kind of hit different angles of the perception of media and language and communication to just Texans and Fort Worthians. So, right, kind of wrapping this up, Elon Musk is doing all of his cases with X here in Tarrant County. Right, we are home of some of the most conservative media, like Dr. Phil, who gets PBR contracts. But then you have us being home of Democrats trying to be more moderate because they think that's how they'll win. And clearly that was a losing strategy this year. So as the rise of Tarrant County becoming the HQ for conservative media across the country. How do we find a progressive voice? Because we're also going to continue to have the spectacles housed here to make us never talk about issues in the news instead of talking about the next big football game. Then it's the World Cup. Then it's, and which is all great. But at the end of the day, it's like we'll never be able to see all these other things that are underlining the things that we won't talk about.
Yeah, I mean, back to that transit piece just quickly, where we talk about we need to get something in place to deal with getting people to World Cup. Whereas if we just put our minds behind building a system that worked for all the people in their daily lives, we would have infrastructure that could get people to World Cup much more easily than now. And so I want whatever we put our minds behind trying to build to do that, to stay and serve people in their daily lives.
Yeah. Well, we're going to go ahead and move into wins and losses. We like to start with our losses and then end with a win. And what is your loss?
So, I mean, kind of going back to some of the politics, we've talked a little bit about the belief that there was like just massive voter fraud going on. And we had this elections integrity unit built here. And I don't know what happened to those people because they were thinking that this was all bad. But apparently the outcome of this election has led them all to believe that there's nothing to be worried about anymore. But in an article that I saw, basically stating that in a worsening trend, Texas becomes the 9th state to pull out of ERIC, which is I don't know what it stands for, but it's a nonprofit organization that helps states maintain accurate voter rolls by providing list maintenance reports to states of individuals who may have moved, passed away, as well as voters who have duplicate registrations. The organization was widely uncontroversial and heralded as an effective tool by both parties until just last year when it became a subject of a flurry of right-wing conspiracy theories. And so now people are pulling out of it. But just to my personal experience, I have 2 children that are no longer living in this state, who have not voted in elections in this state for a very long time, who are still on the rolls. And so people were knocking on our door up until Election Day, thinking that there were 2 voters in our household that had not voted because they don't vote here anymore and they're still on the rolls. And so I think an organization like this can look at things across the state and they would have been able to see that at least one of those 2 voters had registered and was actively voting somewhere else and could help local registrars make sure that the voter rolls were up to date and accurate. And I think that that's just more examples of us isolating, pulling back from, not collaborating, not cooperating. And that's my loss.
The ERIC stands for Electronic Registration Information Center.
And
it was opened in 2012. So my loss, I'm going to just double click on the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson fight. Again, my loss is just like, I don't know, just a little bit of it just felt a little barbaric, and just, I think after an election that this is just like the energy of what interests America. Like, that's just the thing. Like, I didn't wish this was the thing that got the most views out of all the things that we do as people. And so I guess I'm just like more like, I don't know, disappointed in what kind of things that makes us interested in, numbing ourselves from real problems.
But on that same night that was happening, what were you doing? Because that was a fantastic win that we have not mentioned.
Yeah, that was my win. My win would be Leon Bridges Day, November 15th. And Leon Bridges' show was phenomenal. I actually think the best performer was Maddie Parker delivering the speech. I mean, it was, to me, the most fired up the whole concert was when she announced Leon Bridges Day. So she did her thing, and it was just cool seeing his dad dancing. You could see his dad just being really excited and joy. So that was just cool seeing Leon do his thing there. You had also just a lot of different guests, and it was special. Started the day at Hotel Dries, ended the day at Hotel Dries. That was probably the most packed I've ever seen Hotel Dries. So it was, it was just such a good time. And so that's definitely my win. But you could tell in the suites, people's Netflix were buffering all in the suites
TV
while they're trying to
screens?
like turn them on and off,
both?
because they're trying to turn them on and off and like re get it set up. So
Well, I was sad to miss it. I didn't buy tickets because we had a family obligation that night, and I stuck to the family obligation, which I'm glad I did, but it was a little hard to watch all of my friends. People would say, oh, who's going? I'm like, everyone in Fort Worth except for me, apparently. But I got a sweatshirt because you brought me a birthday present.
come on now. But so what's your win?
My win was this morning's 817 gather. I think that even with all the things that have, drug me back down and all of that, the fact that almost 40 people showed up, I think that they all really enjoyed the time that they had. I think that it went way deeper than I expected it to. Nydia did a great job, and it was funny because we were asked to get into smaller groups with people that we didn't know, and I had a hard time doing that because I knew pretty much everyone that was there, which also was heartwarming to me. So I just think that this podcast and doing this with you, and that many people are interested in kind of coming together with us in person in the face of all this, like, how do we communicate, and do we resort to using podcasts and social media and things that are not in person, that there was that much interest in getting together in person and working on community, because I think that just takes me back to my community roots.
Yep.
And the way that I think we can continue to be a positive force.
Yeah, we'll look to do the 817 gather again in December. So if you're interested, we might possibly see what we can do there, because we're pretty at capacity with 40 people already. So I know there's some people who are like, what are we doing here? I thought I was going to hear y'all rant about topics and we were going to be able to talk, but I promise the next one we'll have the podcast studio open up, because it'd be so cool to have people come in here, introduce themselves, give their hot takes on Fort Worth. We did it on like paperboard, or like, what's that called, the poster board, and people wrote about what they wanted to feel, see in Fort Worth. But it would have been so cool if they would have done it in a audio version, so then I could mix it into a show. That would be really cool. I think a part of what we were trying to do is also keep the group anonymous, so that we could have like more authenticity, because so much of Fort Worth is about what institution do you represent? Are you representing that institution correctly? So then your voice has to be marginalized, because you can't talk up or speak up. And so we knew we wanted people to be able to come here regardless of where they work, to just really share what was ever on their mind and not think it was going to end up on a podcast. So we really started the first one building trust before we started building power and letting people's voices be heard. But I think we can start doing that as the new year comes.
Yeah, I think the suggestion was to kind of open the podcast studio and maybe allow people to come in and say a little bit that we could then share on the pod of listeners and what their takeaways were. And then you made the suggestion of opening up the things that we might talk about week to week to week to the folks that came today and the folks that listen. Like, send us a text, send us an article. If there's something that you think we should touch on, go ahead and let us know what that is, and not just be reliant on you and I sending articles back and forth all week.
Yeah. So I think a lot of ways to get the whole crew involved more into the podcast. So thank you guys for listening to another episode of the 817 podcast.
So it's a good thing that we had a big today with the gathering in person and then the recording of the podcast, but because of travel and holidays, the next 2 weeks we will be off. Next week you're traveling, and the week after that I'm traveling, and so it'll be a 2-week hiatus for you all to kind of absorb what we talked about here. Those of you who came to the gather, to let that kind of sink in and respond to an email that I think we're going to be sending out to get feedback from that. And give us that feedback, and then we will gather again for the podcast on
December 8th to post on the 9th.
So that'll be the next December, after the beginning of December. So not the first weekend in December. I mean, the first Monday in December, but the second. Yeah.
Yep. So we'll see you guys then, and thank you for listening to the 817 podcast.
Swipe, dopamine swipe, follow us, likes, double tap. Now they control your life, control your life. Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe.